The long-awaited Trump peace plan is a very comprehensive plan, probably the most comprehensive agreement we've seen put on the table in any regard. It's over 180 pages. It's a far-reaching plan in the sense that it provides predominantly all the security needs that Israel needs. It includes gives Israel security authority over the whole range, over the Jordan River. It's also the electromagnetic sphere over the airspace. So it's very wide-ranging in favor of Israel on the security side. It's vastly different and steps away from other peace plans in the way that it sets aside Resolution 242 on the issue of the settlements in the West Bank, gives Israel authority over about 37% of the settlements, which would mean that predominantly there would be no movement of people out of areas within those West Banks, other than from about 10,000 legal outpost settlers. So from that perspective, for Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, with a symbolic capital for the Palestinian people, within the sort of outlying sort of villages on the side of East Jerusalem. It provides for the monitoring or the ownership of the Islamic parts of Jerusalem to remain under the Waqf, under the Jordanian authority that has long administered that area. In relation to land for the Palestinians, there is a plan to link Gaza to the other Palestinian areas through a tunnel, and to create some other settlement outposts for the Palestinians alongside the Negev Desert, alongside the desert near the Egyptian border. It's all predicated on a 4-year plan for the Palestinians to achieve statehood, and part of the requirements for that achievement of statehood is to recognize Israel fully and for the demilitarization of Hamas in Gaza as a whole. Alongside it, there's a plan to provide a full investment into, that number wasn't named, it was sort of billions and billions and billions, into the recreation of the infrastructure of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian state, as well as a $50 billion investment fund into recreating a viable Palestinian state that talks about creating up to 1 million jobs and trying to build statehood on that side of things. The questions for the Palestinians is this the statehood, or is this meaningful statehood as it can stand? But that is the nuts and bolts of how the plan operates on the key issues. On the refugee issue, it doesn't address fully the return of refugees to different spaces. One of the contested points has always been how does refugee return managed, and it talks of the rehabilitation of refugees in some of the current places that they are in, so Jordan and Lebanon, where those refugees have been for a long time without citizenship, rather than a full right to return. The deal doesn't fully cover the water resources issue, which was usually the fourth final status issue that was considered. So the Palestinians view it as a vast departure from Oslo, the principles which is based on are vastly different, and for both sides, and the question of how it will move forward now and how quickly that will move forward will be to some extent dependent on what happens within the Israeli elections in the next few weeks. It is without doubt a one-sided plan. It's written with high concern for Israeli security. It's probably, of all the deals we've seen, dealing with Israeli security concerns as well as the settlement issue in a more comprehensive way than any plan we've seen. Was it likely to be accepted? Certainly not within the framework in which it was presented. So where we've all heard a lot of analysis about what's right about the deal, what's wrong about the deal, who's included in every part of it, the biggest issue for my concern is that it was never likely to be accepted in the way it was presented from the outset. So this building up as the deal of the century, as Trump's plan, as this unilateral moment, Oscar kind of worthy moment that we're all waiting for, that actually disempowers, in some ways, both sides, but certainly the Palestinian side, that the level of acceptance was never going to be there. The timing of this deal is always interesting. If we look historically, the Middle East peace process seems to come at the end of every presidency. So we look at where Clinton tried to do Camp David II, or you look at even Obama. You have these Middle East peace deals. It's almost like an potentially outgoing American president wants to say, I finally clinch Middle East peace as part of my term. I think Trump in himself, in his fundamental approach, he comes from a business mindset into a diplomatic issue and feels that he can put on these like deals that can't be refused onto the table. And it doesn't quite work like that. The timing, a lot have said, whether cynically or truthfully, in relation to Netanyahu and his potential indictment in Israel, the way that it was launched at this particular time, whilst his indictment was being considered before another election, has been favourable towards Netanyahu. But generally, we have a world that there's increased Arab rapprochement towards Israel, which has worked again within Israel's favour, it's left the Palestinians somewhat more isolated. The Europeans, with Brexit and generally considering Europe, are not able to focus on it fully at this time, and they are to some extent wary of treading on the US-European relationship. So it's left the Palestinians in an odd sort of vacuum, particularly with the internal dynamics that they also have to face. So are these circumstances right for this kind of deal? Outwardly, from the Israeli perspective, great. From the wider perspective, not at all. If Trump's strategy at this point is, if you're taking it from a sort of spoiler theory way to say, okay, I'm going to present this as a departing trade strategy, you get on board and this is the best thing you're going to do, perhaps it could have had some traction. But I will still come back to the framing of it that requires Abbas to go from a position of we are out of the process and I accept your terms or even some of your terms and I'm putting this onto, I'm coming to you, Mr. Trump, with thanks for what you're offering to me, I think is a step too far to ask anybody from a either cultural perspective or understanding of psychology of parties of negotiation to ask them to do. It's just too much of a leap to try and push them into the negotiating table publicly. Now, we always come back to what could go on behind the scenes on the back channel has been yet to be seen.